my friend. All right, are you ready for lesson number 3? Here we are. We're moving, right? We're moving towards, woohoo, healing and freedom of that pain. We got to address really important topic. So lesson 3 is, what are your patterns? What are your patterns? So pattern, these are generally habits that are so deeply ingrained inside of you that you're not really even paying attention to what you're doing. You know what I mean? Like, you know, when you wake up in the morning, you just get out of bed and you roll into the bathroom and you roll out of the bathroom and you roll downstairs and you get your coffee, right? And it's just, that's just kind of your physical habit. You do that every day. But you have emotional patterns, you have mental patterns, you have patterns that have been taught to you by other people that didn't realize they were teaching you patterns. Some of them, not so great. But remember, they didn't know they were teaching you. Because as a spirit and a body, you land in this body and in this family, and you just start learning. You start learning not always by what the people told you to learn, right? It wasn't like, okay, do this and do that. A lot of what you learned is by what they did, not what they said. And so our patterns often come to us from our life experience and from what our family members and our teachers and our churches and our communities, our society has taught us. And so I want to give you a little bit of understanding of how these patterns show up and how important it is to recognize that you can change these patterns. You are not a victim to them. You're influenced by them, yes. But you have the ability to change it up. And I know this because I did it. So I'm not I'm not someone that's going to support you arguing for your limitations and saying, well, I can't do it. I'm not that girl. I'm the girl that's going to say, you know what, you can do it. I'll hold your hand. I'll help you get there. But you can do it because I've done it. So let's talk about those patterns. I want to explain how the conscious subconscious in a very general sense works. We're gonna just kind of break it down for you, okay? So your subconscious is kind of the, let me liken it to an iceberg, okay? So you're familiar with an iceberg, at least in a visual sense. Maybe you've never seen one. I've never seen one. I never choose to see one in my entire life because I don't like the cold. But anyway, so imagine an iceberg. And with an iceberg, I think we have a tendency to know, right? We understand that whatever we see on the surface, so here's the surface of the iceberg, and we see that. That's like the conscious mind. And then underneath the iceberg, so right, like here's our iceberg, and here's the water. And everything that's underneath it, we know the iceberg is likely much, much bigger underneath. It's not usually the other way around. It's not like on this skinny little stand and then it just pops up, right? It's the other way. So what's in our conscious mind is what's above water. That's what we're aware of. That's what we are in present moment consciously aware of. And our subconscious is underneath the water. That's all the things that are guiding us. Those are the things that sometimes feel uncontrollable. They just happen. And we do have control over them, but we don't always know that we do. They're the things that we've been taught, and they're the seeds that have been planted, and they're the patterns and habits and behaviors that a lot of times get a bad rap. But the reality of it is that our subconscious actually also stores all kinds of really valuable things that we need. Like the subconscious is what reminds us how to drive every time we get in the car. We don't have to learn it again. Every time we get out of bed, it remembers how to walk. Every time we go to brush our teeth, it knows what we need to do. And every time we sit down to the computer to work, it has that memory that we pull forward and we use to do our jobs. So we don't want to throw the subconscious away. A lot of people go, oh, well, I don't want to have all those negative patterns from my family. I don't want to fall back into that pattern. You don't have to. You actually have a choice. And what you want to do, though, is you want to recognize that subconscious training that's taught you some of those patterns, we need to bring into conscious awareness. We need to bring it above the water so you can see it, and then you can do something different. You can create a new pattern. You can make new habits. But if you don't know what's ruling you, then sometimes it's hard. Now, those subconscious patterns have been living down there, that have been ruling some of your life, whether you have been aware of some of them and probably haven't been aware of some of them. They often have been trained into you by the people around you, as I said earlier. And the people around you were doing the best they could with what they knew at the time. And they probably weren't very conscious of why things were happening the way they were happening. You know, and the goal, what is the goal in our life is, you know, when we know better, we do better, right? And when we know better and we do better, then we hope that we teach better. And that does happen, and we do evolve and enlighten in those ways. And underneath those habits that aren't serving you, those patterns that are not working, underneath that is oftentimes the struggle, the fight. And the fight is in loving myself enough. And most of us, just simply by observing those around us, listening to what those around us said, we're not taught to love ourselves enough. And if those words were said, we didn't necessarily see the action behind them. So we could have a parent say, you know what, you've got to put yourself first, and you have to make decisions that are based on what's best for you. But then we could watch our parent want to go to work out, but choose not to because their sister called and said they need help, so they put them on the sidelines. You see what I'm saying? And I know you've done this. We've all done it, probably hundreds of times. But the reason that we fall back into that pattern of not putting ourselves first is generally the bottom line, if we dug way down in, is because we don't love ourselves unconditionally. Now remember, if you're paying attention in lesson 2, I talked about that. And I talked about loving yourself unconditionally, right? So when you love yourself unconditionally, you know your value. You know your worth. And in lesson 2, I also said, when you landed in this body, spirit embodied, that you knew who you were, and who you are is love. But oftentimes, as we let these patterns take over our life, and we're very unconscious, we're just kind of going through the motions, we're just doing what we do, we forget who we are. And those patterns start to take us over. What we've got to do is we've got to take our power back, and we've got to empower ourselves with our innate value, which is self-love. So I want to give you a little exercise to think about here. There's 2 words that sometimes are confusing to people, and sometimes not, but I think a lot of times they're identified a little bit different than how I would like you to understand them. The first one is self-esteem. So just write that word down, or think about the energy of the word self-esteem and what that means to you. So what does that really mean to you? And then let's take the other word, self-worth. And what is self-worth to you? And oftentimes when I ask this in a group of people, there are many people that think they're the same. And usually there's about the same amount of people, honestly, that think they're different. And what do you think? Do they feel like they're very similar, or do they feel different? And what I notice is a lot of times when I ask that question, I can see people like their energy is like their head, their heart, their head. Well, yeah, it feels, no, it's, and they don't really actually have an answer. Well, it's kind of a trick question. Kinda. Self-esteem is your perception of your value. Your perception of your value. Nobody else's. It's not based on anybody else, okay? It's your perception of your value. Self-worth is your innate value. Your innate value. So self-worth is you're worthy because you're here, because you are a spirit in a body. Simply, you're worthy. But self-esteem is your perception of that worth. And that is usually based on what we have learned about our value, based on what we've experienced, walked through, or witnessed in our lives. Now remember, when you were born, you're love, right? We're love. That's who we are. That is who we are. And when you're born, you knew that. You knew who you were. You knew that you were love. And self-esteem and self-worth, they were actually in alignment. They actually were lined up. You knew your self-worth, your value, and your perception of your value was spot on. I'm worthy. I deserve to be here. Come feed me. Change my diaper. Do everything I need. Take care of me. Sacrifice yourself. Like you knew your value. And then as life started to happen, and you started to get responses from people around you in different ways, you started to base your value on the way people responded and or reacted to you and what you did or did not do. You're a good girl, you're a bad girl. If you did this, you're good. If you did this, you're bad. And that's how you started to move from knowing your value and your self-esteem being lined up and moving away from your actual innate worthiness and that perception of your value changing. So we got to get back, right? We got to get back to knowing our value, living our value, right? Our perception of our value is that we are worthy and we are love and we deserve unconditional love, and to love unconditionally, of course. So what do we got to do? Well, it's simple and not so simple. You got to retrain yourself. You have to choose to retrain yourself. And you might not be ready for that because you might say, gosh, I don't even know how to do that. And right now, I'm not asking you to know how to do it. Remember, I'm going to guide you through it. But what I am asking is, are you willing? Are you willing to look at your patterns? Are you willing to dig in a little bit and see where they come from and see how the environments and the people around you might have taught you things? Unknowing, guys, unknowing, unconscious. It wasn't intentional. So this is not a go blame my parents, go blame my society and community thing. Absolutely not. Actually, it's more about take your own responsibility and say, you know what? I've been feeling pain. And I want something different. And because I want something different, I am willing to dig in and look at the pain, see what it represents, look at the patterns, and start to allow myself to see that I have the ability and the power to retrain myself and to move some of the subconscious thoughts that have been living underneath, and I'm willing to bring them up. I'm willing to shine the light on them. I'm willing to bring them into my conscious awareness in the light so I can see them. So my question for you is, what are your patterns? And are you willing? Are you really willing?